Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Western Canon Challenge, where we are reading the entirety of the Western Literary Canon out loud. Today we are doing part 2 of Journal Collection number 35, and this is actually the final part of Journal Collection number 35. Usually these journal collections are broken up into, well, at least more than two sections, but this is the exception. So, with that said, I will go ahead and read the first entry, and it is not a date, but it is a topic. Theory and practice in life. In our recipe, the ingredients are separately named, but in the cup which we drink, the elements are exquisitely mixed. The heart and head are both nourished, and without fumes or repentance. Our greatest debt to woman is of a musical character, and not describable. Harriet Martineau solved the problem of woman by describing a man. Woman. Today, in our civilization, her position is often pathetic. What she is not expected to do and suffer for some invitation to strawberries and cream. Mercifully, their eyes are holden that they cannot see. Pythagoras was right, who used music as a medicine. I lament my want of ear, but never quite despair of becoming sensible to this discipline. We cannot spare any stimulant or any purgative. We lapse so quickly into flesh and sleep. We must use all the exalters that will bring us into the explosive and productive state, or to the top of our condition. But to hear music as one would take an ice cream or a bath, and to forget it the next day, gives me a humble picture. Of what use is genius if the organ cannot find a focal distance? The day of triviality and verbiage. Once, quote, the rose of Sharon perfumed our graves, as Bayman said, but now, if a man dies, it is like a grave dug in the snow. It is a ghastly fact abhorrent to nature, and we never mention it. Death is as natural as life, and should be sweet and graceful. God only knew how Sadi dined. Roses he ate, and drank the wind. And this one thing is certain, that the benefactor of his country shall not propose to himself models, nor content himself with outstripping his neighbors and contemporaries in the race of honor, pausing when he is the best in his little circle. That leads to atheism and despair. New Hampshire and Vermont will in 6 months let loose some young savage from their wilds, who shall take his petite mitre of virtue and culture like a doll in the hands and shatter the pretty porcelain. All reference to models, all comparison with neighboring abilities and reputations is the road to mediocrity. Calm, pure, effectual service distinguishes the generous soul from the vulgar meat. He is one who without phrase does what was hitherto impossible. In general, I am pained by observing the indigence of nature in this American Commonwealth. Ellen H. said she sympathized with the transcendental movement, but she sympathized even more with the objectors. I replied that when I saw how little kernel there was to that comet which had shed terror from its flashing hair on the nations, how few and what cinders of genius, I was rather struck with surprise at the largeness of the reflect, and drew a favorable inference as to the intellectual and spiritual tendencies of our people, for there had not yet appeared one man amongst us of a great talent. If 2 or 3 persons should come with a high spiritual aim and with great powers, the world would fall into their hands like a ripe peach. Go to hear a great orator, to see how presentable truth and right are, and how presentable are common facts. Quote, Oh, I did get the rose water, where ye wool ne'er get nane, for I did get that very rose water into my mither's wame. The new races rise all the pre-divided into parties, ready armed and angry to fight for they know not what. Yet easy it is to see that they all share, to the rankest Philistines, the same idea. The idea rides and rules like the sun. Therefore, then, philosopher, rely on thy truth. Bear down on it with all thy weight. Add thy weight of thy town, thy country, and the whole world. Triumphantly thou shalt see, it will bear it all like a scrap of down. I think the best argument of the conservative is this bad one, that he is convinced that the angry Democrat who wishes him to divide his park and chateau with him will, on entering into the possession, instantly become conservative and hold the property and spread it as selfishly as himself. For a better man, I might dare to renounce my estate. For a worse man, or for as bad a man as I, why should I? All the history of man, with unbroken sequence of examples, establishes this inference. Yet it is very low and degrading ground to stand upon. We must never reason from history, but plant ourselves on the ideal. Men are edificant or otherwise. Samuel Hoare is to all men's eyes conservative and constructive. His presence supposes a well-ordered society, agriculture, trade, large institutions, and empire. If these things did not exist, they would begin to exist through his steady will and endeavors. Therefore he cheers and comforts men, who all feel this in him very readily. The reformer, the rebel who comes by, says all manner of unanswerable things against the existing republic, but discovers to my groping daemon no plan of house or empire of his own. Therefore, though Samuel Hoare's town and state are a very cheap and modest commonwealth, men very rightly go to him and flout the reformer. June 15th. A second visit to the Shakers with Mr. Hecker. Their family worship was a painful spectacle. I could remember nothing but the Spedal dei Pezzi at Palermo. The shaking of their hands, like the paws of dogs, before them as they shuffled in this dunce dance, seemed the last dilation. If there was anything of heart and life in this, it did not appear to me, and as Swedenborg said that the angels never look at the back of the head, so I felt that and saw nothing else. My fellow men could hardly appear to less advantage before me than in this senseless jumping. The music seemed to me dragged down nearly to the same bottom, and when you come to talk with them on their topic, which they are very ready to do, you find such exaggeration of the virtue of celibacy that you might think you had come into a hospital ward of invalids afflicted with priapism. Yet the women were all well dressed, and appeared with dignity as honored persons, and I judged the whole society to be cleanly and industrious, but stupid people. And these poor countrymen, with their nasty religion, fancy themselves the church of the world, and are as arrogant as the poor negroes on the Gambia River. The long life. We must infer our destiny from the preparation. We are driven by instincts to higher innumerable experiences which are of no visible value, and which we may revolve through many lives in the eternal whirl of generation before we shall assimilate and exhaust. It is the rank of the spirit makes the merit of the deed. And then there is a French sentence which is no translation. Yes, cries the angel, but my attractions transcend all your system. Mrs. Snow confessed, when the phrenologist found love of approbation, that she did like to suit. If I made laws for Shakers or a school, I should gazette every Saturday all the words they were wont to use in reporting religious experience, as spiritual life, God, soul, cross, etc., and if they could not find new ones next week, they might remain silent. Be an opener of doors for such as come after thee, and do not try to make the universe a blind alley. The right dandies. We have, it is true, a class of golden young men and maidens, of whom we say that for practical purposes they need a grain or two of alloy to make them good coin. If society were composed of such, the race would speedily be extinct by reason of bears and wolves who would eat them up. Granted, but perhaps it is in the great system that society shall have always some pensioners and pets, and how much better that such musical souls as these, worshippers of true beauty, objects of friendship in monks and vestals and sacred culture, should be the exempts than the present muscadines of civilized society, the dandies, namely, who inherit an estate without wit or virtue. Novels make us skeptical by giving prominence to wealth and social position, but I think them to be fine occasional stimulants, and though some with shame, I am brought into an intellectual state. But great is the poverty of their inventions. The perpetual motive and means of accelerating or retarding interest is the dull device of persuading a lover that his mistress is betrothed to another. Disraeli is well worth reading, quite a good student of his English world, and a very clever expounder of its wisdom and craft, never quite a master. Novels make us great gentlemen whilst we read them. How generous, how energetic should we be in the crisis described, but unhappy is the wife or brother or stranger who interrupts us whilst we read. Nothing but frowns and tart replies from the reading gentleman for them. Our novel reading is a passion for results. We admire parks and the love of beauties and the homage of parliaments. Government. A fire breaking out in a village makes immediately a natural government. The most able and energetic take the command and are gladly obeyed by the rest. The feeble individuals take their place in the line to hand buckets, and the boys pass the empty ones. I can well hear a stranger converse on mysteries of love and romance of character, can easily become interested in his private love and fortunes, but as soon as I learn that he eats cucumbers or hates parsnip, values his luncheon and eats his dinner over again in his talk, I can never thenceforward hear that man talk of sentiment. I rode with a merry sea captain, between whom and the stage coachman was a continual banter. We stopped at the poorhouse. "Mr. Winchester," said the captain, "your passengers say you ought to stop at the poorhouse every day." The driver replied, "If we should both stop there, Captain Davis, we should only stop where we started from." The Fitchburg Road cost $1,100,000, 50 miles. The Worcester, $3,000,000, 40 miles. New church in Hanover Street cost $65,000. People seem to me often sheathed in their tough organization. I know those who are the charge each of their several daemon, and in whom the daemon at intervals appears at the gates of their eyes. They have intervals, God knows, of weakness and folly like other people. Of these I take no heed. I wait the reappearings of the genius, which are sure and beautiful. The lover transcends the person of the beloved. He is as sensible of her defects and weaknesses as another. He verily loves the tutelar and guiding daemon, who is at each instant throwing itself into the eyes, the air and carriage of his mistress, and giving to them this unearthly and insurmountable charm. Do not lead me to question whether what we call science is help or hurt. Yet unluckily in my experience of the scientific, it is a screen between you and the man having the science. He has his string of anecdotes and rules as a physician, which he must show you, and you must endure, before you can come at the color and quality of the man. Phrenology, too, I hate. C adapts his conversation to the form of the head of the man he talks with. Alas! Presently the railroads will not stop at Boston, but will tunnel the city to communicate with each other. The same mob which has beat down the Bastille will soon be ready to storm the Tuileries. Henry described Hugh as saving every slip and stone and seed and planting it. He picks up a peach stone and puts it in his pocket to plant. That is his vocation in the world, to be a planter of plants. Not less is a writer to heed his vocation of reporting. The vice of Swedenborg's mind is its theologic determination. But a rose, a sunbeam, the human face do not remind us of deacons. Life which finishes and enjoys. Life is so affirmative that I can never hear of personal vigor of any kind, great power of performance, without lively sympathy and fresh resolutions. The power of a straight line is a square, and wisdom is the power, or rather the powers, of the present hour. We have no prizes offered to the ambition of generous young men. There is with us no Theban band. Our mass meetings are a sad spectacle. They show great men put to a bad use, men consenting to be managed by committees, and worse, consenting to manage men. The retribution is instant diminution, bereavement of ideas and of power, of all loveliness and of all growth. It is in vain to bawl Constitution and patriotism. Those words repeated once too often have a most ironical hoarseness. In common with all boys, I held a river to be good, but the name of it in a grammar hateful. Ah, how different it is to render an account to ourselves of ourselves, and to render account to the public of ourselves. 'Tis the most difficult of tasks to keep heights which the soul is competent to gain. Granted, sadly granted, but the necessity by which deity rushes into distribution, into variety in particles, is not less divine than the unity from which all begins. Forever the demiurges speak to the junior gods, as in the old tradition of the Timaeus, gods of gods, that mortal natures may subsist, and that the universe may be truly all, convert or distribute yourselves according to your nature to the fabrication of animals, etc. The use of geology has been to want the mind to a new chronology. The progress of physics and of metaphysics is parallel at first. It is lowest instinctive life, loathsome to succeeding tribes like the generation of sour paste. It is animalcules, earwigs, and caterpillars writhing, wriggling, devouring, and devoured. As the races advance and rise, order and rank appear, and the aurora of reason and of love. Nature will only save what is worth saving, and it saves not by compassion, but by power. It saves men through themselves. If the black man carries in his bosom an indispensable element of a new and coming civilization, for the sake of that element no wrong, nor strength, nor circumstance can hurt him. He will survive and play his part. So now it seems to me that the arrival of such men as Toussaint, if he is pure blood, or of Douglas, if he is of pure blood, outweighs all the English and American humanity. The anti-slavery of all the whole world is but dust in the balance, a poor squeamishness and nervousness. The might and the right is here. Here is the anti-slave, here is man. And if you have man, black or white, is an insignificance. Why, at night all men are black. The intellect, that is miraculous. Let us not be our own dupes. All the songs and newspapers and subscriptions of money and vituperation of those who do not agree with us will avail nothing against eternal fact. I say to you, you must save yourself, black or white, man or woman. Other half there is none. I esteem the occasion of this jubilee to be that proud discovery that the black race can begin to contend with the white, that in the great anthem of the world, there we call history, a piece of many parts and vast compass, after playing a long time a very low and subdued accompaniment, they perceive the time arrived where they can strike in with force and effect, and take a master's part in the music. But I am struck in George Sand with the instant understanding between the great, and in I Promessi Sposi with the humility of Fra Cristofero, and in Faustina with the silent acquiescence of Andlau, and the new choice of Faustina, for truth is the best thing in novels also. Does he not do more to abolish slavery, who works all day steadily in his garden, than he who goes to the abolition meeting and makes a speech? The anti-slavery agency, like so many of our employments, is a suicidal business. Whilst I talk, some poor farmer drudges and slaves for me. It requires a just costume, then, the office of agent or speaker. He should sit very low and speak very meekly, like one compelled to do a degrading thing. Do not then, I pray you, talk of the work and the fight as if it were anything more than a pleasant oxygenation of your lungs. It is easy and pleasant to ride about the country amidst the peaceful farms of New England and New York, and sure everywhere of a strict sympathy from the intelligent and good, argue for liberty, and browbeat and chastise the dull clergyman or lawyer that ventures to limit or qualify our statement. This is not work. It needs to be done, but it does not consume heart and brain, does not shut out culture, does not imprison you, as the farm and the shoe shop and the forge. There is really no danger and no extraordinary energy demanded. It supplies what it wants. I think of the witnesses of the truth would do their work symmetrically. They must stop all this boast and frolic and vituperation, and in lowliness free the slave by love in the heart. Let the diet be low, and a daily feast of commemoration of their brother in bonds. Let them leave long discourses to the defender of slavery, and show the power of true words, which are always few. Let us, if we assume the dangerous pretension of being abolitionists, and make that our calling in the world, let us do it symmetrically. The world asks, do the abolitionists eat sugar? Do they wear cotton? Do they smoke tobacco? Are they their own servants? Have they managed to put that dubious institution of servile labor on an agreeable and thoroughly intelligible and transparent foundation? The planter does not want slaves. Give him money. Give him a machine that will provide him with as much money as the slaves yield, and he will thankfully let them go. He does not love whips or usurping overseers or sulky, swarthy giants creeping round his house and barns by night with lucifer matches in their hands and knives in their pockets. No, only he wants his luxury, and he will pay even this price for it. It is not possible, then, that the abolitionist will begin the assault on his luxury by any other means than the abating of his own. A silent fight, without war cry or triumphant brag, then, is the new abolition of New England, shifting the thronging ranks of the champions and the speakers, the poets, the editors, the subscribers, the givers, the reducing the armies to a handful of just men and women. Alas, alas, my brothers, there is never an abolitionist in New England. October 15th. Editor's Note. Here follows a list of the persons to whom Mr. Emerson is sending his second volume of essays. Besides his mother, his wife, and Aunt Mary, and nearest friends, the following names appear among the 51 mentioned: Ogden Haggerty, Benjamin Rodman, Horace Greeley, Giles Waldo, W. A. Tappan, William M. Pritchard, Christopher P. Cranch, Charles K. Newcomb, R. W. Griswold, Sarah Clark, H. W. Longfellow, George Bemis, J. R. Lowell, W. H. Dennett, Mrs. Lydia Maria Child, C. C. Haswell, Mrs. Hildreth, Mrs. W. Pope, Miss M. C. Adams, Nathaniel Hawthorne, Warren Burton, Benjamin Peter Hunt, Charles Lane, Harriet Martineau, J. W. Morgan, John Sterling, Cornelius Matthews, John G. Whittier. End of note. For the fine things I make poetry of them, but the moral sentiments make poetry of me. Here follows a poem. There are beggars in Iran and Araby. Said was hungrier than all. Footnote. These are fragments of verses long after mended and filled out. See Poems Appendix, pages 320 to 322. Here follows another poem fragment. Was never form and never face so sweet to him as only grace, which did not last like a stone, but gleamed in sunlight and was gone. Beauty chased he everywhere, in flame, in storm, in clouds of air. He smote the lake to feed his eye. With the precious grain of the broken wave, he flung in pebbles well to hear the moment's music which they gave. Loved harebells nodding on a rock, a cabin topped with curling smoke. The sun and moon are in my way when I would be solitary. There are many topics which ought not to be approached except in the plenitude of health and playfully. In Maine they have not a summer, but a thaw. I understand very well in cities how the Southerner finds sympathy. The heat drives every summer the planter to the north. He comes from west and southwest to the Astor and the Tremont houses. The Boston merchant bargains for his cotton at his counting house, then calls on him at the hotel, politely sympathizes with all his modes of thinking. Quote, he never sided with these violent men, poor Garrison, poor Phillips are on the coals. Well, all that is very intelligible, but the planter does not come to Concord. Rum comes to Concord, but not the slave driver, and we are comparatively safe from his infusions. I hardly understand how he persuades so many dignified persons, who were never meant for tools, to become his tools. Intense selfishness, which we all share. Planter will not hesitate to eat his Negro because he can. We eat him in a milder fashion by pelting the Negro's friend. We cannot lash him with a whip because we dare not. We lash him with our tongues. I like the Southerner the best. He deals roundly and does not cant. The Northerner is surrounded with churches and Sunday schools and is hypocritical. How gladly, if he dared, he would steal the lips of these poor men and poor women who speak for him. I see a few persons in the church who I fancy will soon look about them with some surprise to see what company they are keeping. I do not wonder at feeble men being strong advocates for slavery. They have no feeling or worthiness which assures them of their own safety. In a new state of things they are by no means sure it would go well with them. They cannot work or facilitate work, or cheer or decorate labor. No, they live by certain privileges which the actual order of the community yields them. Take those and you take all. I do not wonder that such would fain raise a mob, for fear is very cruel. Instinct of Whigs may shudder at Napoleon. But what does Webster or Andrew Jackson, or what does Crocker or Belknap or the Hosmers fear from the elevation of Irish or Negroes? They know they can defy competition from the best whites or Saxons. They should be abolitionists. A gentleman may have many innocent propensities, but if he chances to have the habit of slipping arsenic into the soup of whatever person sits next to him at table, he must expect some inconvenience. He may call it his peculiar institution, a mere way of his. He never puts it in his own soup, only in the soup of his neighbor, and even only in some of his neighbors. For example, he is partial to light hair, and only spices the dish of such as have black hair, and he may persuade his chaplain to find him a text, and be very indignant and patriotic and quarrelsome and moral religious on the subject, and swear to die in defense of this old and strong habit he has contracted. The conscience of the white and the improvement of the black cooperated, and the emancipation became inevitable. It is a great deed with a great sequel, and cannot now be put back. The same movement goes forward with advantage. The conscience is more tender, and the black more respectable. Meantime, the belly is also represented, and the ignorant and sensual feel the danger and resist, so it goes slower. But it gains, and the haters of Garrison have lived to rejoice in that grand world movement which every age or two casts out so masterly an agent of good. I cannot speak of that gentleman without respect. I found him the other day in his dingy office. I have no doubt there was as much intense selfishness, as much cowardice, as much paltering then as now. Many held back and called the redeemers of the race fanatics and Methodists. There were many who with the utmost dignity and sweetness gave such peppercorn reasons. There were church carpets, etc. Then, too, died many an old aunt in man's clothes that would nail up her pew to keep Clarkson out. Bonaparte was sensible to the music of bells. Hearing the bell of a parish church, he would pause, and his voice faltered as he said, "Ah, that reminds me of the first years I spent at Brienne. I was then happy." Add as much force of intellect again to repair the immense defects of Bonaparte's morale, and he would have been in harmony with the ideal world. Wendell Phillips. I wish that Webster and Everett, and also the young political aspirants of Massachusetts, should hear Wendell Phillips speak, were it only for the capital lesson in eloquence they might learn of him. This, namely, that the first and the second and the third part of the art is to keep your feet always firm on a fact. They talk about the Whig party. There is no such thing in nature. They talk about the Constitution. It is a scorned piece of paper. He feels after a fact, and finds it in the money-making, in the commerce of New England, and in the devotion of the slave states to their interest, which enforces them to the crimes which they avow or disavow, but do and will do. He must keep no terms with sham churches or shamming legislatures, and must and will grope till he feels the stones. Then his other and better part, his subsoil, is the morale which he solidly shows. Eloquence, poetry, friendship, philosophy, politics, in short, all power must and will have the real, or they cannot exist. The ground of hope is in the infinity of the world, which infinitely reappears in every particle. I know against all appearances that there is a remedy to every wrong, and that every wall is a gate. Dumont's Mirabeau. Mirabeau said of Bernève, "He is a tree growing to become sometime the mast of a line of battleship." Target was said to be drowned in his talents. I could not puncture his dropsical eloquence, says Dumont. Editor's note. After some pages of anecdotes and sayings of Napoleon collected for representative men, there follows an enumeration of the names and types of men chosen as such, and the following sentence. Jesus would properly be one head, but it requires great power of intellect and of sentiment to subdue the biases of the mind of the age and render historic justice to the world's chief saint. Alcott does not do justice to the merits of labor. The whole human race spends their lives in hard work from simple and necessary motives, and feel the approbation of their conscience, and meet with this talker at their gate, who, as far as they see, does not labor himself, and takes up this grating tone of authority and accusation against them. His unpopularity is not at all wonderful. There must be not a few fine words, but very many hard strokes every day to get what even an ascetic wants. P pleased the Boston people by railing at Goethe in his Phi Beta Kappa oration, because Goethe was not a New England Calvinist. If our lovers of greatness and goodness after a local type and standard could expand their scope a little, they would see that a worshipper of truth and a most subtle perceiver of truth like Goethe, with his impatience of all falsehood and scorn of hypocrisy, did he manifest his love of truth and scorn of falsehood to the women whose hearts he broke, was a far more useful man and incomparably more helpfully allied to religion than 10,000 lukewarm church members who keep all the traditions and leave a tithe of their estates to establish them. But this clergyman should have known that the movement which in America created these Unitarian dissenters, of which he is one, began in the mind of this great man he traduces, that he is precisely the individual in which the new ideas appeared and opened to their greatest extent and with universal application, which more recently the active scholars in the different departments of science, of state, and of the church have carried in parcels and thimblefuls to their petty occasions. Sarah Alden Ripley is a person externally very successful, with a most happy family around her by whom she is loved and revered, and surrounded too by old and tried friends who dearly cherish her. She has quick senses and perceptions and ready sympathies, which put her into just relations with all persons, and a tender sense of propriety which recommends her to persons of all conditions. Her bias is intellectual. It is not her delicacy of moral sentiment that sways her, but the absence of all motive to vice in one whose passion is for the beauty of laws. She would pardon any vice in another which did not obscure his intellect or deform him as a companion. She knows perfectly well what is right and wrong, but it is not from conscience that she acts, but from a sense of propriety in the absence too of all motives to vice. She has not a profound mind, but her faculties are very muscular, and she is endowed with a certain restless and impatient temperament, which drives her to the pursuit of knowledge, not so much for the value of knowledge, but for some rope to twist, some grist to her mill. For this reason, it is almost indifferent to her what she studies. Languages, chemistry, botany, metaphysics, with equal zeal and equal success, grasping over all the details with great precision and tenacity, yet keeping them details and means to general end, which yet is not the most general and grand. I should say that her love of ends is less than her impartial delight in all means, delight in the exercise of her faculties, and not her love of truth is her passion. She has a wonderful catholicity, not at all agreeable to precisians, in her creed and in her morality. She sympathized with de Stael and with Goethe as living in this world, and frankly regrets that such beings should die as had more fitness to live in this world than any others in her experience. In like manner, whilst she would rapidly appreciate all the objections which speculative men would offer to the actual society among us, she would deprecate any declaration or step which pledged one of her friends to any hostility to society, fearing much more the personal inconvenience to one she loved than gratified by his opportunity of spiritual enlargement. This delight in detail, this pleasure in the work and not in a result, appears in her conversation, wherein she does not rest for the tardy suggestions of nature and occasion, but eagerly recalls her books, her studies, her newest persons, and recites them with heat and enjoyment to her companion. Her extreme gentleness she excels in what is called using philosophy against the hurts of life. She follows nature in many particulars of life where others obtrude their own will and theory. She leaves a dunce to be a dunce, and rather observes and humors than guides a scholar. She is a necessitarian in her opinions, and believes that a loom which turns out huckabuck can never be talked into making damask. This makes her very despondent in seeing faults of character in others, as she deems them incurable. She, however, has much faith in the maturation and mellowing of characters, which often supply some early defect. She will by no means content an abolitionist by her reliance on principles. She has too much respect to facts. She delights in French science for its precision and experiment, and its freedom from English convention. Very little taste in the fine arts, not at all disposed to hazard a judgment on a picture or a statue or a building, and only a secondary taste in music, and even in poetry, admiring what those whom she loves and trusts admire, and so capable of pleasure that she can easily be pleased by what she is assured by those she trusts is pleasing. If they say, "'Tis good, 'tis good." If they say, "'Tis bad, 'tis bad." She is feminine in her character, though she talks with men. She has no disposition to preach or to vote or to lead society. She is superior to any appetites or arts. She wishes to please and to live well with a few, but in the frankest, most universal and humane mode. But in her unselfishness and inattention to trifles, like very well to be treated as a child and to have her toilet made for her by her young people, too confident in her own legitimate powers of engaging to the best, to take any inferior methods. An innate purity and nobility which releases her once for all from all solicitudes for decorum, or dress, or other appearances. She knows her own worth, and that she cannot be soiled by a plain dress or by the hardest household drudgery. She is a pelican mother, and though one might not say of her what was said of the Princess Vaudemont, ask any beggar the way to her house, they all know it. Yet of her house and her husband's it is certain that every beggar and every guest who has once visited it will never forget it. It is very certain that every young man of parts remembers it as the temple of learning and ideas. After all, we have not described her, for she is obviously inspired by a great, bright, fortunate daemon. She is of that truth of character that she torments herself with any injustice, real or imagined, she may have done another. Nature will outwit the wisest writer, though it were Plato or Spinoza, and his book will fall into his dead limbo we call literature, else the writer were God too, and his work another nature. This is the end of Journal Collection number 35, dating from the year 1844, when Emerson was 41 years old. This is also the end of Volume 6 of the 10-volume collected works of Emerson's journals. Thank you for listening.